Everybody, I'm back with another video, and today's video is going to be looking at Barcelona versus PSG in the Champions League. PSG showed a dominant performance against the struggling Barcelona side, and we're going to get right into it using Keyframe, a great way to produce quality content as well as do it at an efficient rate so you can get out quality content to your players or coaches or whoever you make content for. So let's get right into it with PSG in possession of the ball, moving in against Barcelona's mid-block. They built out of the back using two center defenders, and the midfielders now, as they entered into the midfield third, the midfielders became more flat and moved more towards the ball rather than away, and this narrow occupation of the second line of their buildup allowed the fullbacks to go wider, while the transition phase was protected by the three central midfielders. And then with the wide fullbacks, this inverted the wingers from PSG. Keane and Kylian Mbappe played more narrow, and they, by occupying this narrow position, they worked with Icardi to then look to move into dangerous spaces between the Barcelona lines. So between the lines near the half spaces and the central midfielders, in these areas, this is where PSG players would look to drop into, and this space was also exaggerated by the positioning of the PSG midfielders in the second line of the PSG possession structure, because as they lined up more horizontally and more level on the same horizontal plane, this pulled the Barcelona midfielders closer towards the ball and higher up the field. So when doing this, this caused Barcelona players to be drawn forward and more narrow. As Barcelona played a 4-3-3, and then moving deeper, they moved into a 4-5-1. So by their defenders being pinned by the three PSG forwards, looking to access this space in behind while always maintaining the threat in behind, the Barcelona team became very susceptible, and their horizontal compactness, when they became over compact, the route around the Barcelona block then became open. So now the next picture is even the first line passes that the players in possession would play. So the midfielders would come deeper, and now the midfielders would be used with the center back as first line passes to emphasize this space in between the lines, as we see here. And I'm going to highlight this space as well. So just the space between the lines we're highlighting now, because of the first line passes PSG used, and these bounce passes with the central midfielders coming into the second line of the build-up shape. So now from here, players like Mbappe or Icardi would then drop deeper between the lines to access this space. So either the center defender would step with Mbappe, leaving space for a player like Icardi to run in behind so he can look for the more direct option, or the pass can be played in this space to Mbappe to then be able to run at the defense. And this was more or less a theme of Barcelona's midfield shape. They played with their back four, as we can highlight here, and by having such narrow wingers and in such close proximity to Icardi, this put a lot of stress on the Barcelona back line, and they often defended the central corridors with numerical equality, and which left space in behind and made jumping very dangerous. And then the wingers would also come very deep, which gave the players in PSG's first line of build-up a lot of time on the ball to then be able to drive forward, and by the three center midfielders coming more deep to then receive these passes, it overextended Barcelona's line and manipulated them to then open up half spaces and more advanced options, while the width was always being held by the fullbacks of PSG. So now, looking at PSG a little bit deeper now, in possession of the ball, we see their shape take a more expansive look, and their fullbacks not quite as wide or high yet. And when this happens, the midfield become more staggered and cover more spaces, and we even see asymmetry forming between the lines, occupying different spaces and creating different spaces between the lines. So by the left attacking midfielder positioned in a higher area, this allows Mbappe to then move into the wider area and operate in a less dense area, which allows him to use his pace and individual 1v1 quality to take on defenders of Barcelona. And this is also seen on the weak side as well. So we can just look at the connections between wingers and forwards now when the ball is in a deeper area and they're not attacking a compact mid-block. So it's a clear 4-3-3 and with an asymmetric midfield, which pushes Barcelona to operate differently across the lines. And in this area, Barcelona did drop quite deep right away, and their wingers dropped deep very early. But as we can see, it's more of a 4-1-4-1 rather than a 4-3-3 right away. So just things to look for, and the closer to Barcelona got to their goal, the less lines they administered defensively, and they moved to a 4-5-1 quite quickly. But looking at Barcelona in possession now, they played a little bit similar to PSG in possession, but their fullbacks operated a little bit more versatile in the sense that they performed different roles, and especially in the first and second phase of their build-up, the positioning of the fullbacks was a little bit deeper and a little bit more narrow, allowing Griezmann or Dembele to play in a wider area and allowing the midfield three to then occupy more dangerous spaces. So what this meant for PSG is more of a 4-3-3 structure, and then moving back towards the ball, an asymmetric 4-5-1. But we can see here the wingers are also responsible for the players in the wide areas, and the midfielders can fill in the gaps in the use of their cover shadows to block passes between the lines to players like Messi, who operated in a free role, gravitating more towards the half spaces between the lines, but even came deeper and sometimes wider, depending on where the space was and where he could get on the ball and influence play the most. So here we have the central defender for Barcelona was able to drive forward. He was able to drive forward and then pick out Griezmann between the lines, who came into a more narrow position, as we see here, because of the positioning of Jordi Alba then in the wide area. So Jordi Alba started narrow, but as they moved further up the field, Jordi Alba went wide and took the cue from Griezmann's positioning, more narrow, and this might have been one of Barcelona's better chances in the match, in the run of play, with space being able to be created in between the lines. And we see Messi here dropping between the lines on the weak side, but by Griezmann dropping, getting on the ball in the blind spot of the midfielders, this makes him the responsibility of the defenders, which then in turn opens up all this space in behind for then Jordi Alba to run into and use his pace. So now looking at another picture, the fullbacks for Barcelona are playing deeper but in a wider area. And this puts players like Messi, Dembele, and Griezmann into more central areas, but also they play very asymmetrically because of Messi's free role, and they often occupied both the central corridor and the wide area, because Messi would drop into these positions from a higher area like here, but that's not Messi. Messi would often drop. He played off the right and would often drop into positions between the lines, or even as far as along Sergio Busquets in the holding midfield position to try and unbalance the PSG defense and find space between the lines, which made them quite unpredictable. But PSG were very good in transition because of the threat of Kylian Mbappe and Keane to exploit the two center backs from Barcelona, and just the individual qualities of these players left Barcelona quite exposed. But the space between the lines was often very small because of PSG's compactness and their limiting between the lines, and where the more players were, we can see even the space between the forwards and midfielders is very compressed because of the high volume of Barcelona players in this position. So now looking at PSG pressing or Barcelona building from the back, they used their goalie to create a three-man build-up. Busquets was the lone pivot with an asymmetric midfield in front of him. And one thing that I noticed Barcelona lacked a little bit was when their central midfielder dropped deeper towards the ball to then initiate a third man concept. There is often, from here, a disconnect from the action to then a position of a player further forward between the lines to then keep progressing the attack. So when the third man action was implemented, either the concept was missed by the players or the space was then unable to be taken advantage of in further areas. And from here, we can see the rest of the Barcelona shape. We have our fullbacks both playing wide, and Messi playing a slightly more narrow role in the build-up. And now we have our weak side fullback creating the width again and releasing the wide player to then play in a more narrow area. And then we see PSG's 4-3-3 matched up against this, and their central midfielder would oftentimes be the player to then go and jump to press the ball. Because of the position, it would use his cover shadow to block the pivots, and the weak side winger from PSG would then be able to compress the space horizontally and create better access. So it just made more sense for some of the times for the attacking midfielder to go and press the ball rather than Keane or Icardi or Mbappe to press from out to in and leave the wide areas exposed. So now moving back, we can look at a more compact PSG shape and a more of a 4-5-1, depending on the positioning of the players. Always a back four. Kylian Mbappe played as the left winger, and then we see just slightly the staggering here wasn't always a trend, and then Icardi as the lone forward. So this staggering was often to then go and press the center back if possession was looking that way, or just to jump to create better access to Busquets. But this looked as a 4-4-2 formation, but often was a 4-5-1 with Kylian Mbappe and Keane ready to transition in a vertical manner. Now with Barcelona on the ball, they have their two central defenders and Busquets, and they played asymmetrically with Sergio Dest and a central midfielder, or Messi if he was dropping into this role, alongside creating a 2-3 build-up shape to protect against transition, and then players holding the width as well as players between the lines creating height and occupying space like De Jong is doing, as well as width on both sides for Barcelona shape to try and take advantage of a threat in behind because of the over-compact PSG shape in their deeper mid block or their low block. So now here again in the second half, it was not many concepts changed, and it was very similar But one of the problems Barcelona had was the flatness of their first and second line, and it was really the two pair together, and often with both lines being so flat, they didn't access areas like really dangerous areas such as the half spaces between the lines on either side, really. As we can see, all this space between the lines, and when Barcelona had the ball deeper, these areas weren't taken advantage of and the ball wasn't worked into these areas, so it was quite hard for them to create build-up if it wasn't through a qualitative advantage that they might have had. So now PSG in the second half again maintained their positional structure, and their concepts they implemented were quite the same. A little bit more staggering from the midfielders, but the narrow front three is the main concept and their relationship with the wide fullback. So when the ball would go into the wide area from an advancing center back, this would then create space, or a 2v1 situation we can call it, between Keane on this side and then the fullback, to then create a 2v1 and get Barcelona's fullback stranded and access space in behind. So this was what really killed Barcelona, and these opportunities came frequently for PSG to then progress through. So that was the analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tried to keep it short and brief today, and looking forward to the next one. So I'll see you then.